Hello, and today, I'll be ranking every single book that I read in this past month from best to worst. So I'm going to hop right into it. I read quite a bit of books this month. This camera is a bit low, actually. There. That looks to be about good. I'm a little bit lopsided, whatever. Anyway, I'm just going to dive right into it. My favorite book that I read this month is Zen in the Art of Writing by Ray Bradbury. This is a nonfiction book by Ray Bradbury about writing, about the art of writing. And it's not so much writing advice, although it technically is writing advice, but it's more writing encouragement. It's also partly an autobiography because Ray Bradbury writes a lot about his own life in here. And this is just such a good book. It's beautifully written, as is everything with that Ray Bradbury wrote. It's all so beautifully written, and I enjoyed this more than a lot of his fiction, actually. It was so good and so inspiring to me, as I'm an aspiring writer myself, and I'm hopefully publishing my first book soon. This is just so inspiring to me, and there were so many great quotes in it that I liked. For example, near the end of it, there was one quote that I really liked. He says, "I think you might easily find a new definition for work, and that word is love." And yeah, this entire book was amazing. Definitely the best book that I read this month. This is 10 out of 10. And I don't have a physical copy right here, right now, of this next book on the list because I borrowed it from the library and had to return it, but it is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. I've been reading a lot more Agatha Christie lately. I loved And Then There Were None, and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd was absolutely brilliant. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd is, of course, a murder mystery, and probably one of the best murder mysteries that I've ever read. It had such a shocking plot twist at the end. Like, the whole explanation behind everything is something that I don't think I would ever have guessed, no matter how much I thought about it. If you read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, I guarantee you, whatever happens, you will not guess who the murderer is. It's just so brilliant the way this book was written and the way Agatha Christie distracts you with so many red herrings. And I had a lot of theories, a ton of theories, but none of them were anywhere near close to the truth. This book was so shocking to me. I remember after I had finished it, after I read that ending, I just collapsed on my bed because my brain felt like it was exploding from all of it. Such a brilliant book. This one is another 10 out of 10. The next one is another Agatha Christie book, which is Murder on the Orient Express. This book, again, was brilliantly written, as with all of Agatha Christie's books. Not as good as The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and Then There Were None, but still a very good book that I really enjoyed. And actually, with this book, it has a lot more of a simplistic plot than And Then There Were None and Murder of Roger Ackroyd, I noticed. Out of all the Agatha Christie books I've read, it's definitely the one with I'd say the easiest to follow plot, the most simplistic. I loved this, and the thing with this book is I actually solved the crime about 3/4 of the way through. I guessed who did it and why they did it. Now, when I guessed this, I wasn't completely sure of myself, but at the end, when I found out that I was right, I was so excited because it's basically impossible to solve an Agatha Christie mystery. At least all the ones that I've read, it's just impossible. But after reading The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, I was ready for anything. I had all these crazy theories going into this book. I was just ready for anything at all to happen. And I guess that's how I solved it. But just because I solved this doesn't mean that it was a predictable book at all. I'm actually quite proud of myself that I solved it because it was not predictable at all. Still a brilliantly written book. This one is 9.5 out of 10. And then we have this, which I didn't read this entire book. This is a collection of all the original Sherlock Holmes stories, or some of them. And the one that I read out of this was a novel called The Hound of the Baskervilles. I have read 2 of the Sherlock Holmes short story collections, as well as 2 of the novels. Well, now 3 of the novels, since I read The Hound of the Baskervilles. and I love the Sherlock Holmes stories. I think they're excellently written. I love all the characters. And The Hound of the Baskervilles was no different. It had a very, very intriguing mystery with a clever explanation to it, and the characters were probably the best part of it. I think Arthur Conan Doyle is absolutely brilliant at writing characters. I really enjoyed The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's another 9.5 out of 10. And then I have some Ray Bradbury here, the first of which is The Illustrated Man. Now, this book was very interesting because it is a collection of short stories, but they're all framed as stories told on the tattoos of the Illustrated Man. Now, the Illustrated Man is basically like Maui from Moana. His tattoos come to life, but they show things that happen in the future, and so each of these short stories is something that the tattoos on the Illustrated Man tell is going to happen in the future, which is such a fascinating concept. Most of these short stories I really enjoyed. They were excellently written. I loved The Rocket Man, The Rocket, and then I can't remember what it was called, but the one that takes place on the planet Venus where it's just raining forever. That story was incredible. And again, Ray Bradbury's prose is amazing. Most of these stories just left me speechless because they were so good, although a few of them I didn't enjoy that much, like Marionettes Inc., and there were a couple of others that I just didn't like as much, but still, a brilliant book. I would definitely recommend it. 9 out of 10. And the last Ray Bradbury book that I read this month is Something Wicked This Way Comes. This book was so excellent. In this book, Ray Bradbury's prose was at its best. Now, Ray Bradbury usually writes very good prose. It's very flowery, very poetic, which I love about it. But especially in this book, the prose was so good. It was so poetic and vividly written. It was just amazing. At the ending of every single sentence, I had to stop and think about it because it was such a beautiful sentence. This book is absolutely brilliantly written. I think that the plot is brilliant as well. It has really good themes overall, although there was one or two things that I didn't like so much about it, but that came in near the ending and I don't want to talk about it since that is spoilers for this book and I don't want to spoil it for you. This is still an amazing book. Ray Bradbury was such a brilliant writer. And I love the characters as well. The two main characters, Jim and Will, are basically like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, which I loved since I love those books as well. And this book was excellent. The prose, probably the best prose I've ever read, besides maybe for Tolkien. Absolutely brilliant. 9 out of 10. And the next one is the longest book I read this month, and probably one of the longest books that I've ever read. It is Bleak House by Charles Dickens. This is actually Charles Dickens' longest book, and it has a very complicated and interesting plot. This book was very hard to follow because there were just like a million characters that you had to keep track of, and in every other chapter, new characters kept on getting introduced, and it was a bit confusing for me, like the first quarter of the book, but after that, things started to get really interesting, the plot started to thicken, and there wasn't really actually much of a plot until maybe about halfway through. The first half of the book is just basically getting to know the characters. It's basically just a really long setup for what's happening later on in the story. And I think Charles Dickens is best in writing characters. I love his characters. This was no different. I loved Esther and Mr. Jarndyce. And Ada and Richard as well. Mr. Smallwood, Inspector Bucket, they were all just such excellently written characters. Charles Dickens is great at writing characters. And the ending was so good. This book is very long, so by the time you get to the ending, you feel like you spent an entire lifetime with these characters. And the ending just wraps everything up so perfectly and so beautifully. It is such a satisfactory ending. Honestly, the greatest ending this book could ever have had. I can't imagine an ending that would be better. This book is sort of a mixture of several different genres. It has like a murder mystery. It also has tragedy and comedy and romance. It's just a whole bunch of things like mixed together into one book. This is so interesting because half of it was written in the first person from the perspective of Esther, and then the other half was written in the third person, present tense, which is such an interesting idea. I'm not the biggest fan of like present tense. Like The Hunger Games is written in it, and so is Divergent. And it was very interesting reading this. Especially in the third person present tense bits of this book, I feel like Dickens was very, very sarcastic. There were a lot of funny parts in this book. But yeah, this was a wonderful book. The characters were so excellently written. By the time you get to the end, you feel like you've spent so much time with them and you're so attached to them, and they really feel like real people. They're so well fleshed out, they're five-dimensional, and the prose is great as well. I just love Dickens' writing and I can't wait to read more of him. This one is a 9 out of 10. The only reason it's not 10 out of 10 is just because a lot of it could have been trimmed down, like especially the first half. It was so long and drawn out. It was just basically getting to know the characters, and it could have been done in less than 500 pages like it was done, especially in some chapters where the characters are just making small talk for like 15 pages about the weather and the family and whatnot. A lot of it could probably have been trimmed down and it still would have been a great book. Very slow paced, but definitely worth the journey. I'm giving it 9 out of 10. The next one is Percy Jackson's Greek Gods. I love the Percy Jackson series. I still haven't read Heroes of Olympus, though I want to, and I haven't finished the Kane Chronicles yet either. But Percy Jackson's Greek Gods is very interesting because it's a bunch of original Greek myths, only they're retold by Percy Jackson himself. So I recommend this book to anyone who just wants to learn more about Greek mythology or who just wants to laugh, because this book is so hilarious in the way it retells Greek myths. It was so hilarious, and I actually learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know before about Greek mythology, which was very interesting. This book was so funny. I highly recommend it. And then this one chapter, where was it? Let me find it in a minute. This one chapter, it's a very short chapter, it lasts only one page, but it's called Zeus. Only Zeus gets crossed out. And I'll read you the whole chapter here. It says, "Why is Zeus always first? Seriously, every book about the Greek gods has to start with this guy. Are we doing reverse alphabetical order? I know he's the king of Olympus and all, but trust me, this dude's ego does not need to get any bigger. You know what? Forget about him. We're going to talk about the gods in the order that they were born. Woman first. Take a back seat, Zeus. We're starting with Hestia." It's just so hilarious, and the chapter titles are absolutely brilliant as well. Like, for example, Hephaestus makes me a golden llama. Not really, but he totally should. Apollo sings and dances and shoots people. Ares, the manly man's manly man. And, like, it's kind of funny reading original Greek myths, and to learn about how Zeus was just probably the worst of the gods, and, like, especially in Disney's Hercules movie, and in a lot of the other, like, Greek mythology adaptations as well, they make Zeus out to be a great guy, but Zeus is just horrible. He's the worst of the gods. But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. Brilliant book. I'm giving it 8.9 out of 10. Very hilarious retelling of Greek myths. The next book on this list is Resistance by Jael L. Knight. This is book 1 in the Ilian Chronicles. It is Christian fantasy, and it reads sort of like the Wingfeather Saga, which I liked because I love the Wingfeather Saga, and I would definitely recommend this book to people who love fantasy, to people who are Christians, or even if you don't love fantasy, you should still read this book because I think it's very good. The characters are probably the strongest part of it. I love the characters' journeys, especially Kieran's character journey. I really liked her, and Jace's character journey was great as well. So the characters were great. I think the plot was pretty good. The only letdown with this book really was just the prose and the dialogue, or like the way it was written, because it's written in a very basic and simplistic manner, and I like more complex, flowery prose that shows off personality more. And the prose and dialogue in this book did none of that. It just felt very basic. The prose almost felt like the author was just reciting the story. It's like if you're reading off a poem out loud, but you're just reciting the poem and you're not putting any feeling into it or any inflection into it at all. That's sort of how the prose and dialogue felt. It was just very basic, and it could have been way better. So for that reason, I'm giving this book 8.5 out of 10. It was still really good. I enjoyed it. It's a very good story with good morals in it. but just the prose and dialogue was very basic and simple, and I didn't like that part of it. So I'm giving it 8.5 out of 10. I will be reading the rest of the Ilian Chronicles, hopefully. One more thing about the Ilian Chronicles that I didn't like that much, and this isn't really like a fault within the book, I guess, it's more of a personal preference with me, but the Ilian Chronicles, despite the fact that it is fantasy and that it takes place in a different world than ours, it takes place in a fantasy world, there wasn't a whole lot of world building, and it didn't exactly feel like another world, and there just wasn't a whole lot of depth to the world. Like, I'm a big fan of Tolkien and stuff. I really like fantasy worlds that are deep, that are detailed, where the world building is well thought out, and there just wasn't a whole lot of that in Resistance. The next book, is God, Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert. This is book 4 in the Dune saga. Now, I'm not a big Dune fan, but I definitely do enjoy the books, and the movies as well. The movies are really good. And the Dune books get more and more interesting and fascinating as they go along, although this one was kind of weird because Paul's son, Leto Atreides II, like somehow turns himself into a gigantic worm centipede thing. He's basically like Jabba the Hutt, which Star Wars probably got the idea of Jabba the Hutt from this book because Dune came out before Star Wars, and Star Wars took a whole lot of stuff from Dune. Like, a whole lot. So, actually, Leto Atreides II is probably where George Lucas actually got the idea for Jabba the Hutt in the first place. This book was so fascinating. It was mainly like philosophy, with the characters debating back and forth to each other about certain philosophical topics, which I found to be very, very fascinating. A great book. The ending was amazing. Kind of a weird book, but very fascinating, and I definitely want to read the rest of the Dune series as well. I'm giving this one 8.5 out of 10 as well. The next one is another 8.5 out of 10, and I won't say too much about it because I already did a book review of it, so you can watch that if you're interested in hearing my full thoughts on this book. But it is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is like a very, very old edition, so it doesn't actually have a cover or dust jacket, but you can see the title there in the spine. This was a pretty good book in general. I really enjoyed it. One or two things that I didn't like, but I'm giving it 8.5 out of 10. If you want to hear my specific thoughts on this book, then you can watch my review. And the last book, I also do not own a physical copy of it, and it is a novella called The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. And I listened to the audiobook of this. Now, H.P. Lovecraft is an author I've sort of been wanting to read for a while. I've heard that he's kind of like H.G. Wells and Edgar Allan Poe, and I really enjoy both those authors. He lived around the same time as H.G. Wells as well, so I decided to start with The Call of Cthulhu. And The Call of Cthulhu was very interesting. However, it's not really a coherent story. Not really any there's no main character, and it's much more about like the lore and the history of this certain event about Cthulhu, who is he's basically Davy Jones. He's like this sea-like entity. Not sea-like entity, that doesn't even make any sense. He's an entity from the sea, and he's sort of a giant squid thing, so basically Davy Jones. That there's a cult following around, and Call of Cthulhu was an interesting book, just it wasn't much of a story, and there weren't any main characters. It was okay. I definitely want to read more of H.P. Lovecraft, but Call of Cthulhu was okay. It wasn't a coherent story. It was kind of interesting, but I'm going to give it 6.5 out of 10. But those are all the books that I read in this past month, ranked from best to worst. Thank you so much for watching this video, and for now, farewell.